U.S. Congress members call for America to push for Ukraine's ceasefire. Former Minneapolis police officer pleads guilty in George Floyd death. Data confirms private insurers use Medicare Advantage to steal billions. Saudi Arabia sentences famed Quran reciter to prison for leading prayer at Hagia Sophia. Somalia facing child nutrition deaths on a scale not seen in half a century. Indonesia taking steps toward becoming a hub of modest fashion. From our Chicago studios, this is the Muslim News on Muslim Network TV. Assalamu alaikum, I'm Samana, Siddiqui. Our top story tonight. Progressive U.S. lawmakers on Monday called on President Joe Biden to shift his approach to the conflict between Ukraine and Russia. They urged a proactive democratic push with the goal of seeking a realistic framework for a ceasefire through direct negotiations with Russia. Representative Pramila Jayapal, a Democrat from Washington and Congressional Progressive Caucus chair, led the effort. Lawmakers said the U.S. must lead efforts to end the war as peacefully as possible and provide Ukrainians with economic and military aid, now totaling $60 billion. They noted the pain and suffering of the people of Ukraine and the risk of nuclear war that threatens the entire world. The Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights reports over 6,000 civilian deaths and nearly 10,000 civilian injuries. The war has also displaced an estimated 13 million people. A former Minneapolis police officer pleaded guilty on Monday to the May 25, 2020 killing of George Floyd. J. Alexander Kueng pleaded guilty to aiding and abetting in the second-degree manslaughter of Floyd. By taking the plea deal, the greater charge of aiding and abetting Floyd's murder was dropped. Kueng faces 3.5 years in prison to be served concurrently with his federal sentencing. If Kueng had been convicted of the second-degree murder charge, he could have faced up to 12.5 years in prison. Kueng is the second officer to agree to a plea deal. Former Minneapolis police officer Thomas Lane pleaded guilty in May to a second-degree manslaughter charge. He has been serving a 2.5-year federal prison sentence concurrently with a 3-year state prison sentence. Community leaders say Fargo, North Dakota's Islamic cemetery has been the target of a vandalism spree. Last Friday, an employee at the cemetery entered the building housing concrete vaults used in burials. Hadi Suleiman, a spokesperson with the Islamic Society of Fargo, said the employee found all the vaults had been destroyed. The building stored 5 such vaults, all of which have been smashed open. Concrete debris was scattered on the floor of the storage facility. The damage is estimated at more than $5,000. The Cass County Sheriff's Office is in charge of the active investigation into the vandalism. The U.S. charged 2 Chinese intelligence officers on Monday with trying to obstruct the prosecution of a Chinese-based telecommunications firm. The U.S. rolled out 3 separate cases against Beijing. The 2 alleged Chinese spies were identified as Guo Chunhe and Zheng Wang. They have been charged with an attempted scheme involving stealing information from the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Eastern District of New York. The information would have stymied the prosecution of the Chinese telecommunications company. The Justice Department did not identify the firm. It accused He and Wang of trying to bribe a U.S. government employee they believed had been recruited to secretly work for China. The 2 men paid the employee $61,000 in bitcoins, but that person had been working as a double agent for the FBI, the department said. Author Salman Rushdie has lost sight in one eye and the use of one hand following a stabbing attack in New York in August, his agent said. Andrew Wiley, a New York-based literary agent, said Rushdie had 3 serious wounds in his neck. Wiley also said Rushdie's one hand was incapacitated because the nerves in his arm were cut. Rushdie has about 15 more wounds in his chest and torso, Wiley added. Rushdie was stabbed while on stage at the Chautauqua Institution in New York on August 12th. Several of Rushdie's novels have won widespread acclaim, including Midnight's Children, which won the Booker Prize in 1981. His most controversial book, The Satanic Verses, published in 1988, stirred protests across the Muslim world. Ayatollah Khomeini, Iran's former supreme leader, issued a death fatwa against the author. In 2019, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, Khomeini's successor, said the fatwa was still valid. Iran has denied any involvement in the attack on Rushdie. Heavy shelling from Burma along the Bandarban border district of Bangladesh has forced hundreds of families to flee for safety. Bullets from Burma again landed inside Bangladesh's Lamuchari and Bahirmat areas Saturday, violating the border, according to fleeing locals. The shelling occurred in a roughly 12-mile area near the border in Burmese territory, they added. More than 150 families in the border area fled, seeking a safe place Saturday night. Salma Firdaus, a local official, told Andalu agency families along the border had been asked to evacuate after the shelling started. She said the situation remained stable Sunday morning. Saudi Arabia sentences famed Quran reciter to prison. Details after the break, so stay tuned, and we'll be right back after these messages.
A free 3-minute online chat can give you the personalized tips you need to start boosting your retirement savings today.
I am what hunger looks like in America.
If I could be you, and you could be me for just 1 hour. Walk a mile in my shoes. Walk a mile in my shoes.
Despite the development of a COVID-19 vaccine, millions around the world will not have access. We need a vaccine that's free and available to everyone, everywhere. It's time for a people's vaccine.
What was it like when you started this network out, when you started Sound Vision those many years ago?
You know, after 9/11, one lady called me and she says, what is your channel which I can watch? And I say, I'm sorry, we don't have a channel. And you know what she said? She said, then how America will know about you?
SubhanAllah. Anything you want to say to the people who are watching? That we had one sister who messaged that she grew up on Sound Vision. What do you say to the people who have been long supporters?
Thank you. Thank you. It is because of you we are able to do all of that. So the generation of Adam's world, you need to take it over for the next generation. And that's my invitation to you. So keep telling everybody where to watch. They can watch it on Galaxy 19 satellite, Amazon Fire TV, Apple TV, or easy thing, muslimnetwork.tv, or our YouTube channel, or our Facebook channel. And with your help, inshallah, ladies, the one who called me, what channel should I watch Muslims on? Answer is here and now.
To stop this genocide, we need your help.
Welcome back. Saudi Arabia has sentenced a Quran reciter to 12 years in prison for leading prayers at Istanbul's Hagia Sophia Mosque 8 years ago. The kingdom is intensifying its crackdown on religious figures. Saudi rights organization Prisoners of Conscience said a Saudi court last Wednesday sentenced Imam and Quran reciter Abdullah Basfar to 12 years in prison. Basfar was tried for accepting an invitation to lead worshippers in the courtyard of the historic mosque in Turkey. The organization condemned the ruling and called on authorities to release him unconditionally. Basfar previously held an associate professorship in Sharia and Islamic studies at Jeddah's King Abdul Aziz University. He was arrested in August 2020 after a video of him leading prayers at the courtyard of Hagia Sophia in 2014 surfaced and spread online. Indonesia is taking steps toward becoming the hub of modest fashion by 2024. Riau-based Asia Pacific Rayon collaborated with 5 local modest wear brands at the Jakarta Muslim Fashion Week on Saturday. Models strutted down the runway in modest wear of different colors and styles. From head coverings to long-sleeve dresses, all fabrics were made of APR sustainable and homegrown viscose rayon. APR director Basri Kamba said the company has teamed up with the brand Baju Fuku, which showcased its White Stories collection. The all-white collection was inspired by Muslims longing for going on pilgrimage. More than 40,000 African migrants have arrived in war-torn Yemen since the start of the year, the International Organization for Migration, or IOM, reports. The UN agency said women and children accounted for 30% of the migrants. The IOM warned the situation along Yemen's border areas remains precarious. There have been continuous reports of violations against migrants. African migrants, particularly from Ethiopia and Somalia, use Yemen as a transit point on their way to the Gulf for work. Yemen has been engulfed by violence and instability since 2014. That's when Iran-aligned Houthi rebels captured much of the country, including the capital, Sana'a. The conflict has created one of the world's worst humanitarian crises. Roughly 23 million people are in need of humanitarian aid and protection, and more than 19 million are in danger of starvation, UN estimates show. Israel has implemented strict rules limiting the ability of foreigners to enter and stay in the occupied West Bank. The regulations have garnered international criticism. They include the compulsory declaration of romantic relationships. A 90-page permit ordinance went into effect Thursday for a 2-year pilot period. It would effectively stifle the Palestinian economy and academia, as well as the work of aid agencies, critics say. It also creates complications for hundreds of thousands of Palestinian families with dual nationality. Nearly all foreign nationals coming to volunteer, work, or study in the West Bank will be granted only single-entry visas, some valid for just 3 months. Visitors will have to leave between visas and wait at times for more than a year before reapplying for entry. In most cases, residency is limited to a 12 to 27-month period. Insurance giants are exploiting Medicare Advantage to capture billions of dollars in extra profits, the New York Times reports. The corporate managed program could result in the complete privatization of traditional Medicare. The Times analysis of dozens of lawsuits, inspector general reports, and watchdog investigations found pervasive overbilling by Medicare Advantage providers. Their overbilling exceeds the budgets of entire federal agencies. Journalist Ryan Cooper called the program a straight-up fraud scheme. Nearly half of Medicare's 60 million beneficiaries now are enrolled in MA plans managed by for-profit insurance companies. Most of the nation's seniors will be insured by private sector alternatives to traditional Medicare by next year, the Times reports. Drought-ravaged Somalia could see the death of children on a scale not seen in half a century, the UN warned Tuesday. The agency called for greater action and funding from the international community. James Elder, a UNICEF spokesperson, said every minute of every day a Somali child is admitted to a health facility for treatment of severe acute malnutrition. The latest admission rates from August show 44,000 children were admitted with severe acute malnutrition. Severely malnourished children are up to 11 times more likely to die of diarrhea and measles, he warned. The current situation in Somalia is worse than the 2011 famine that claimed roughly 260,000 lives, the agency said. Coming up next after the break is our in-depth analysis segment, so stay tuned, and we'll be right back after these messages.
If I could be you, and you could be me for just 1 hour. If we could find a way to get inside each other's minds. Walk a mile in my shoes. Walk a mile in my shoes. Well, before you abuse, criticize, and accuse. Walk a mile in my shoes.
Dad, they took over my bedroom. Come on, come on. Okay, Dad. 1, 2, 3. Dad! You saved me. Dad?
Are you okay?
I'm fine, dear.
Your hero needs you now, and AARP is here to help. Find the care guides you need at aarp.org/caregiving.
Billboards are popping up all over the country with an...
Our neighbors don't realize that Muslims are absolutely opposed to ISIS.
Salam. My name is Abdul Malik Mujahid. I'm an imam in Chicago.
16 shots! No peace!
No justice!
No peace!
So how do we bring up the energy which can really have an impact on the world?
You need to build bridges of understanding among people, and we need to have America moving forward.
That lesson learned have brought the strength of humanity to America
which is the diversity.
Mujahid Talks, only on Muslim Network TV. Faithfully connected.
Assalamu alaikum!
I love Adam's World because it makes me learn in a fun way. That Adam has a green face and orange hair. I like this song. I like how Adam sings. I like Adam's World because it makes me happy. What? No. And here's Adam and here's Anissa. Adam is and his sister. Adam is a boy and he is really smart.
Download the new Adam's World app at adamsworldapp.com and let's help tomorrow's Muslims today.
To stop this genocide, we need your help.
Welcome back. To talk about nuclear exercises by Russia and NATO, let's go to Edward Ahmed Mitchell. Over to you, Edward.
Thank you, Samana. And now we move to a discussion of Russia, Ukraine, the United States, and the threat of a nuclear conflict, something that we would have thought unimaginable just a few short months ago. And yet that is the reality of what people are concerned about. So to discuss this concerning issue, we are very happy to bring on a special guest who knows a lot about what's happening there, but also the history of near misses when it comes to nuclear conflicts in our world. Let's bring on our special guest, Mr. Patrick Mazza. Mr. Mazza is a longtime activist and journalist. He has recently written a series of pieces about how close to nuclear war our world has come, including a piece about a 1983 incident in which the world came much closer to war than we ever even knew. Mr. Mazza, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you for having me.
Thank you. So first, give us an appraisal, just what's going on in Ukraine right now and Russia that has got people concerned about the potential for some sort of nuclear conflict.
Well, there's been a huge rhetorical deluge based on back and forth between Western leaders and Russian leaders. And, you know, the danger is that this is getting, overblown. You know, the fact is that, you know, the Russian nuclear doctrine, not to be an advocate for anybody here, but the Russian nuclear doctrine is, you know, they're not going to use nuclear weapons unless they're attacked with nuclear weapons or there's an existential threat to their state. You know, and this has been amped up by Western leaders, and I think in a fairly irresponsible way. So that's, you know, that is my evaluation of what's going on right now. I mean, the danger is that, you know, by talking it up, it makes it elevates the possibility of it happening. So, you know, that's my best evaluation of what's going on at this moment.
What are your thoughts on this recent talk? I think a few days ago, the Russian government indicated that they were alleging that Ukraine was plotting to detonate a dirty bomb. And then I think President Putin has at one point said, you know, that all options are on the table in terms of defending their territory. And people took that as an indication of some sort of nuclear threat. Do you think all this is just talk and no one's actually planning to do anything? Or are these things that as you noted, are things that could essentially lead rhetoric to turn into action? What are your thoughts on these issues?
Well, it does. You know, we have heard a lot about the potential of a dirty bomb. We keep hearing this. So, you know, where there's smoke, there's fire. I really don't know. I mean, in reality, the Russians have a lot of escalation potential way before, nuclear weapons. And, you know, the reality is, I mean, this is clear that if the Russians actually used nuclear weapons, it would undermine their own alliances with China, with India, with other nations. Their interest is not in using nuclear weapons. Again, this is not a defense of the Russians. This is not a defense of the war. But what it is, you know, just the logical reality of it. You've got to ask, you know, what would be their interest in using these, unless there was an actual invasion of their country which caused their own state to be threatened. I mean, I'm just going from what I've read about their own doctrine. So, you know, but we know the Russians have a lot of military capabilities that they haven't used yet. So I would see, you know, from the standpoint, the logical standpoint of their own interest, they really don't have a good reason to use nuclear weapons.
Understood. Well, certainly I think everyone hopes you're correct. So people in New York and DC and Moscow can breathe a little easier.
Yeah, and then I live in Seattle. We're a fine nuclear target here. I mean,
yeah, indeed.
You know, one of the largest piles of nuclear weapons is 20 miles west of me at the Trident submarine base. So I'm very much hoping that we don't go for anything so crazy.
Indeed. So now let's talk a bit about history, Mr. Mazza. You wrote an article recently about an incident in 1983 that, was shocking to read about, that it could even happen. But tell us about that incident for our viewers who haven't read the article. Tell us about that incident and, in general, any lessons you think we should be learning from, you know, how we averted nuclear conflict in the past and what can be done to take those lessons and apply them to today.
Very good. Well, you know, people say that we're now noting the 60th anniversary of the Cuban Missile Crisis. 60 years ago today, we didn't know if the world was going to nuclear war. The 13 days of the Cuban Missile Crisis were not resolved until October 28th. John Kennedy got on TV and announced it on October 22nd. But in 1983, something probably at least as dangerous, maybe even more so, happened, because one side really thought that nuclear war might break out. The other side was oblivious. This was a nuclear exercise called Able Archer 83. It was a NATO exercise to mimic escalation to nuclear war in Europe. There were B-52s involved, there were dummy bombs involved. And the Russians really thought, based on then President Ronald Reagan's rhetoric, that the US was planning a first strike on the Soviet Union and would use this exercise as a cover for the real thing. So they had their missiles on alert. They had their mobile missile launchers out in the field. They had their submarines out at sea. They had their bombers in East Germany loaded up with nuclear weapons, ready to go. They had their fighters out on the strip, just engines running, ready to take off in a moment. They had canceled military leave. On November 9th, 1983, the head of their military forces was in the command bunker. And if he had seen any sign that the US and NATO was ready to strike, the likelihood is he would have launched first. Because this is the truth, the awful truth about nuclear weapons and nuclear war, which is why I advocate that they be entirely abolished. Exercises have proven that in nuclear war, the side that strikes first has overwhelming advantage, because they can decapitate the enemy's leadership. They can knock out a lot of their weapons before they launch them. So the enemy's capacity to respond is limited. Therefore, there is an incentive. If you believe your enemy is ready to launch a first strike on you, there's every incentive to launch a first strike to get them first. And this is what the Soviets were preparing for. This is what they were ready to do. And there's a great irony in this, that there was a General Leonard Perutz, who was he was on duty, the intelligence head at Ramstein Air Force Base in Germany. It was up to him to look at all of this going on and decide, well, do we respond or not? Do we escalate our own forces or do we hold back? He had no idea that the Russians were worried and could not imagine that they would strike the West. So he decided not to do anything. And this is one of the great lucky moments of history, because if he had decided to do something and escalate, the Russians would have probably seen that as a sign that, yeah, we're right, and we better get them before they get us. It was later, in a later intelligence review, the words for his decision were fortuitous if ill-informed. And so we passed that moment of danger. Reagan, who I don't have many good feelings for Reagan, but he was sensible. He realized very quickly that his rhetoric had really overamped things. He toned it down, got into negotiations with the Soviets, and actually negotiated the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty, which eliminated the short-range nuclear missiles in Europe, the Russians' own missiles. And that is the story of Able Archer 83. So right now, we actually have similar exercises going on in Europe. Both the Russians and the US are engaged in exercising their nuclear forces. The Russian forces the Russians have notified the US they will be undertaking their exercises. They call them Thunder. As of tomorrow, they will actually launch missiles. They will launch ICBMs and submarine missiles and drop stuff from bombers. The US and NATO right now are conducting what they call Steadfast Noon, which is mock bomber runs over Western Europe, B-52s. There's 60 planes from 14 countries. They have this deal called nuclear sharing, where the US models actually putting its own nuclear weapons on NATO allied planes. So again, it is very important for the sides to be talking to each other. I think really the most important lesson we need to learn is that we need to be talking to each other. For all the disagreements, for all the conflict over the Ukraine war, for all the tensions over that, there is the transcendent issue of human survival of really nature on this planet. A full nuclear exchange would wipe out much of life on this planet. So that's the important lesson. We need to be talking to each other and be very clear with each other about our intentions. I think the Russian defense minister, for the first time in months, has been talking to the US defense secretary and the UK defense minister, which is a very good thing, because we need to know each other that we are not planning. Nobody's planning on launching anything. Ultimately, what we really need to do is move toward drastic reductions of nuclear stockpiles and then elimination. Right now, the START Treaty is our only form of nuclear arsenal control, under which the US and Russia have limited themselves to about 1,550 deployed nuclear weapons. They also have about 2,000 in reserve. Really, we need to talk about immediately bringing that down when the treaty is renewed, presuming it will be renewed in 2026, to 300 to 500, which removes, once you get down to a certain level, it begins to remove that advantage of a first strike, we also need to eliminate the reserve nuclear weapons. There are 2,000 nuclear weapons stored at bases around the country, at the Trident base in Washington State, at ICBM bases in Montana, at Bomber Base, and we need to get rid of those. And because really, if we don't rid ourselves of nuclear weapons, almost inevitably they're going to be used by miscalculation, by miscommunication, or by sheer madness. Once war gets going, it's unpredictable, and the escalation to unpredictable consequences, we don't know. So we really need, whatever our other disagreements are, whatever our other tensions are, we need to address this transcendent issue of survival. I mean, we can fight with each other, we can compete with each other, but we really should put the nuke away.
Mr. Mazza, this is very sobering information and very interesting perspective. Thank you so much for sharing this information with us. We hope to have you back in the future, not to discuss the outbreak of nuclear conflict, but hopefully steps to eradicate nuclear weapons from our world and make the world a safer place. So, Mr. Mazza, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And we'll send it back to you, Samana.
Thank you. That's all from our Chicago studios tonight. Thank you for tuning in. You can find previous episodes and more on our YouTube or Facebook. For more content, keep watching Muslim Network TV or visit muslimnetwork.tv. Salam and good night.